I'm going to keep this straightforward because I know a lot of people feel a little uneasy when they're about to spend a big chunk of money on a new TV. You want to know if the picture really lives up to the hype, whether the smart platform will actually make your evenings easier, and if there's any hidden catch that only shows up after you've already pulled the plug and taken it out of the box. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. Let's walk through the Hisense 65-inch U7 mini LED model the way I would if I were setting it up in my own living room, and see if it delivers the value it promises. First off, the thing that makes this TV stand out in a crowded market is the mini LED backlight combined with a native 165 Hz refresh rate. In everyday terms, that means you'll see smoother motion whether you're watching fast action sports, a sci-fi blockbuster, or a high frame rate game session. I've been watching a mix of NBA games and next-gen console titles on a similar setup, and the difference between a standard 60 Hz panel and this 165 Hz screen is most noticeable during rapid pans. There's less of that stuttered, torn look that can make a fast-moving scene feel cheap. For a family that gathers around for game night, that fluid motion translates to less eye strain and a more immersive feel. The anti-reflection coating is another practical feature that often gets overlooked in spec sheets. My living room gets a decent amount of natural light coming in from a south-facing window, and on a lot of TVs that glare can be a real nuisance. With the U7's anti-glare layer, the screen stays readable even when the sun is high, without having to dim the lights or pull the curtains every time I want to watch a show. That's a genuine convenience if you're not planning on darkening the room every evening. Now, brightness is where the up to 3000 nits claim starts to feel a bit marketingish. In controlled testing rooms you might hit those peaks, but in a typical home setting you'll see strong highlights and solid HDR performance, especially with HDR10+ and Dolby Vision IQ content. When I streamed a recent HDR movie on a streaming service that supports Dolby Vision, the highlights like a burst of sunlight through a window were punchy without washing out the darker areas. Still, because the panel uses local dimming with up to 3000 zones, there can be some blooming around very bright objects on a dark background. In a dark bedroom that's not a big deal, but if you sit very close to a wall-mounted screen in a dim room, you might notice a faint halo on high-contrast scenes. The gaming side of things is where the U7 really tries to differentiate itself. It supports variable refresh rate up to 330 Hz, which means if your console or PC pushes a frame rate lower than the panel's max, the TV will match it on the fly, eliminating tearing. I paired it with an Xbox Series X and a PC running at 120 frames per second, and the experience was buttery smooth. The input lag, while not officially measured, feels comparable to other mid-range gaming TVs I own low enough that competitive gamers could use it without a noticeable disadvantage. The only catch is you'll need HDMI 2.1 cables to get the full 165 Hz at 4K. Older cables will cap you at 60 Hz, which defeats part of the purpose. On the software side, the TV runs Google TV, which gives you a pretty robust app ecosystem and voice control through Google Assistant. I found the interface intuitive enough that I didn't have to dig through endless menus to launch Netflix or YouTube. However, the smart platform can feel a little sluggish when you jump between apps, especially if you have a lot of background processes running. If you're someone who wants a TV that's essentially a plug-and-play streaming box, you might be fine, but power users who expect a snappy, PC-like experience may notice a slight lag. So who should really consider this Hisense? If you have a medium to bright living space and you care about smooth motion for sports, movies, and gaming, the U7 checks a lot of boxes. Its high refresh rate and VRR support make it a solid middle ground between a regular TV and a dedicated gaming monitor, without the price tag of a high-end OLED. Families that watch a mix of content will appreciate the anti-glare coating and the decent HDR performance, which brings out the color palette in newer streaming shows without the need for a dark room. The built-in Google TV also means you won't have to buy an extra streaming stick if you're already in the Google ecosystem. On the other hand, you might want to skip this model if you're hunting for the deepest blacks and absolute contrast that only OLED can deliver. The mini LED does a great job, But because of the backlight it can't completely match the inky darkness of OLED panels, which matters for cinephiles who watch a lot of dark-themed movies. Also, if you're on a tight